This is the crazy thing, like all of the CEOs of the big labs signed a statement that this is an existential risk comparable to nuclear war and pandemics. And they're all saying, we might have it in 3 years. Holy crap, like it is unprecedented. I think the thing I would be most proud of is, if I manage to play like at least a small role in building the mechanism design that enables like global cooperation, because I think the current sort of Darwinian paradigm, where it's the law of the jungle and we all survive through bigger guns and bigger weapons, it can only end in doom and destruction.
Welcome everyone to Audio Tokens, the project where we are trying to generate audio data for our future AGI overlords. Today's guest is Kristian Rönn. Kristian has had his focus on existential risks for a very long time. He started his career at the Future of Humanity Institute before he founded Normative, which is a carbon accounting platform to try to solve the risk of climate change. Recently, he published a new book called The Darwinian Trap, which explains the hidden forces that threaten our humanity's future. And he has now changed gears to a new company that he's founded called Lucid Computing, which is trying to make AI development more controlled and responsible. Welcome so much to Audio Tokens, Kristian.
Thanks a lot for having me. I think we could have done this whole interview in Swedish, but then nobody would understand what we would be saying. So let's do it in English instead, for the benefit of our future AI overlords and for the audience as well.
Hopefully the future AI overlords are smart enough to translate between languages.
Yes.
But yeah, for the audience specifically, some human listeners might prefer it in a language that they know. It's when you read that like intro to your career, you see a clear red thread. It seems like you're trying to tie this red thread together in the book that you just published. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about what the book is about and maybe why you wrote it?
Yeah, so I think I wrote it out of frustration somewhat. I feel like we have sort of this common narrative in society where whenever something is wrong, we need to blame someone. And I think it's hardwired into our nature, more or less. It's the evil capitalist or evil politicians or evil someone, And in the end of the day, I think we're all behaving according to the rules of the system that we find ourselves in. So instead of hating the player, we need to hate the game, or rather change the game. So to quote a famous hip hop artist. So that was the reason why I wrote the book in the first place, to change discourse and then hopefully like help nudge people and inspire people to change the system and in a positive direction.
And what do you see the system is?
I think the system is very deeply rooted. So the book is called The Darwinian Trap because I think it's fundamentally rooted in evolution. Because in the end of the day, we, like any other species, are primarily here to survive. So that means that everything that we have, every trait from, a smart brain or capable hands and so on are optimized for survival. But that doesn't just go for us as individuals. It also applies for the societies and organizations and all of these higher order structures that we have built. And that in turn leads to I think, very dangerous behavior. So I coined this phrase in the book called a Darwinian demon, is when evolution through natural selection makes it adaptive for a particular agent, it could be a company or a person, to behave in a way that maximizes their survival, but at the expense of the well-being of everyone else. And I think when we look at the big global problems such as climate change, that can be explained through the lens of these Darwinian demons. So, I mean, essentially, an enterprise, in order to survive in the public marketplace, you need to optimize for profit. But then you will do that at the expense of everything else, which might be, release of greenhouse gases. Or if you are a country, for instance, then in order to survive, you need to be powerful. So there is a selection pressure for you to develop more and more dangerous and capable weapons in a never-ending arms race in order to stay competitive against your rivals. And essentially, when we look at sort of the societies that lived in harmony with nature, that were perhaps more egalitarian even, they all got outgunned and overpowered by societies that were sort of more focused around like aggressive expansion through power. So I think that's the main sort of thesis in the book, and I think you can apply that for everything, like fake news and social media and horrible bosses. And I have like all of these examples in the book, and we could go through them one by one even. But
what is the most hard-hitting one
of the book?
Which example is the most hard-hitting one?
That's I think the most hard-hitting one is, I have this graph in the book when I look at the most deadly weapons over time. And I think that graph is sort of the most hard-hitting, because it's an exponential thing where essentially you start with like stone axes, and then bronze swords, and steel swords, and end up with Gatling guns and machine guns, and eventually nuclear weapons. And then I have this other box where it's like, okay, but what will come next? Because essentially the birth of empires have been the birth of new military technologies. I mean, the Mongols managed to take over almost all of Eurasia because they had better bows and arrows, and they could do it on horsebacks when nobody else could do that. So they could build an empire around that. Or the Brits, they were the first at building, really sturdy gunboats. So they built an empire around that. And Second World War ended with nuclear weapons. And the US built an empire around that. And as technology will progress, there is an exponential curve here. So eventually we will have the lethality of these weapons, where it will essentially kill everyone. And it is more or less inevitable, in the sense that, once we find out that this technology exists, there will be an arms race to build it. Like, it will, the US security establishment will be thinking, okay, it's either us or China, similar to how they thought when they developed the nuclear bomb back in the days. It's either us or the Nazis, and it's very hard to escape that type of arms race dynamic. So I think that is the most sort of insightful example, I guess, in terms of the like overall consequences. I don't know if it's the most pedagogical example, but it's sort of the most like visceral, where I like feel it in my body, like as soon as I drew that graph, that it's like, okay, we're not heading in a good direction if we continue, if you like just plot the next data point.
And I think I have my guesses of what you think is the next data point. But before we go into AI, so this concept of the Darwinian trap, or the Darwinian demon, how is it similar to Moloch? And maybe you can explain what Moloch is, because that's a concept that has, I think, been around EA circles for a long time. yeah, how is it different from that? And maybe you can explain what it is also.
So
For the audience.
essentially, like Moloch, it's the god of sort of death and destruction. In was it Sumerian religion? I actually don't remember, but uh,
Some
anyways,
mystical
it
thing.
has been popularized by a very intelligent guy called Scott Alexander. So he had this blog post back in 2014 called "The Meditations on Moloch," and essentially he outlines sort of the same arguments that I have in my book. And I would say that, I mean, Moloch and the concept of Darwinian demons are more or less equivalent. To me, the reason why I decided not to go with Moloch is because I feel like it conflates a lot of things into the same thing. I mean, it's sort of
Right.
in a lot of public discourse, it's like, okay, it's some sort of evolutionary selection pressure, but then there is also like Goodhart's law, which is like perverse metrics. So it like conflates a lot of different things in a rather mystical way. And I felt like I wanted to be like a little bit more precise what I mean by talking about like specific evolutionary selection pressures and using and borrowing terminology from like evolutionary theory and more specifically evolutionary game theory. But I might as well have used the word Moloch. And yeah, if I would redo it again, maybe I would use that word a little bit more, to be honest.
Where did you
Because
say
that
that?
was sort of before Liv Bourret had her TED talk on
Oh,
Moloch, so she sort of popularized that term even more. And instead of having like competing terms, I think it's better
yeah.
to amplify around one term. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about it as Moloch rather than
Yeah.
Darwinian demons as well.
Yeah. But with the phrasing of Darwinian demons, then it's easy to go into the Darwinian angels that you also describe.
Yeah.
So I thank you for the transition. So what is a Darwinian angel then?
Yeah, so a Darwinian angel is actually the opposite. So it's when there is an evolutionary selection pressure for cooperative behavior that will essentially benefit like all beings more or less. So instead of being more or less sort of the uh, law of the jungle, which is synonymous with almost sort of zero sum. That if I gain something, it's at the expense of somebody else. Actually a selection pressure for cooperation, and this is by no means something new. I mean, the selection pressure for cooperation has existed and is as old as life itself. It has existed for billions of years, and you could indeed sort of make the case that everything that is beautiful in this world, like human beings and societies and everything that we value, essentially is just like layers and layers of cooperation from sort of the first molecules creating the first proto-metabolism to genes creating a genome to cells creating a multicellular organism to us creating societies and all of that. And I think all of that is due to like essentially Darwinian angels. And I think there has been sort of traditionally this tug of war. So like every single major evolutionary transition, for instance, going from single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms, has been, the angelic forces winning over the demonic forces in a sense. Because, I mean, you can't really take multicellularity for granted, because whenever you have a group of cells that are sort of cooperating, then there is a strong incentive for one of those cells to defect. And I mean, in my cellular organism, that's called cancer, when cells are defecting and selfishly replicating as quickly as possible. And so what I wanted to say with that is essentially like everything that is beautiful comes from this struggle of Darwinian demons and angels, and in most cases angels have prevailed, and so that's how I would describe it. But I think sort of more in societal terms, not necessarily evolutionary terms, like angels could take the form of let's say regulation, for instance. So you might have like a problem of the commons, maybe people are overfishing in the Baltic Sea, for instance, where both of us are from in Sweden, and it's shared with a bunch of Baltic states. And if everyone is overfishing, there will be no fish, and the fishery will collapse. But to incentivize cooperation, we might have like regulation around how much you are allowed to fish with some sort of quota, and that way we can sort of stay within the boundaries for the fish to replenish.
Right. It seems like then that the angel in this case is like artificially enforced in some way, if it has to come from regulation, which seems less stable. Or am I missing something here? Can we have like angels that are naturally emerging?
Yeah, like I think what you're missing here is that the boundary between artificial and non-artificial is in itself artificial. And what I mean by that, cooperative behavior will tend to evolve and actually be selected for. So I mean, sort of imagine, two groups. Imagine like one group of people where everyone is cutting each other's throats at the first time they get a chance, and then another group where they actually cooperate around some principles, and it might be religion, for instance. Then that group will always beat the non-cooperative group. And similarly,
Right.
like any group of cells, any organism where all of the cells have sort of division of labor and some sort of policing of defection, they will tend to survive it in higher numbers. So I mean, if my organism like broke apart from inner competition all the time, that wouldn't be adaptive, and that wouldn't be selected for when it comes to my organism. So I think there is this selection pressure for cooperation to like organically come into force, and that was something that even Darwin highlighted himself, that cooperative behavior can probably be explained through normal natural selection. But maybe we will come to that later as well, because I think that sort of paints a overly rosy picture as well, where you can maybe delude yourself into thinking that cooperation always wins, because it has always won out in the past. So all of the problems that we're seeing with nuclear weapons and AI and climate change, we will just self-regulate, and it will sort of solve itself somehow. And I think that is a mistake.
Survivor bias
Out in the book as well.
Yeah, certainly survivor bias. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Great. Then I learned something new. That's amazing.
Perfect.
Why I have the pod. Cool. But then let's talk about this next data point on the scary graph that you that you illustrated here. So I assume this is AI.
Yes.
And you're nodding.
It's one of them, right? And it's the most obvious one, I think. Yeah.
So how do you explain the AI development world at the moment in terms of like Darwinian demons?
Yeah. So I think there is a couple of aspects to this. And first of all, I would want to point out that, to some viewers that look at today's AI, they might see like, okay, but what are we worried about? Like they can code, and they can maybe do music and some fancy art, and okay, what is there to worry about? And I think that's a very sensible conclusion to draw. But I think you have to sort of plot the graph into the future, because there is this thing called scaling, where if we throw more compute on the problem, it used to be training compute. Now it's more like inference compute with DeepSeek R1 and the O series of models from OpenAI that are examples of that paradigm. But nonetheless, if we throw more compute at it, it will become more intelligent. So we're just sort of in the beginning of this hockey stick, because we also have something called Moore's law, where like the transistor density and the cost of compute just goes down exponentially. So things will become exponentially cheaper and cheaper, and that has been very predictable for the past couple of decades, and that will continue. So that means that we will reach some sort of threshold where intelligence of AI surpasses our own intelligence. And then you might ask, but why is that a problem? And I think the problematic thing here is several reasons. But I mean, I think the most obvious one is like misuse. Just like normal human intelligence, it can be used for good and for bad. Machine intelligence can also be used for good and for bad. So I mean, we used our intelligence in terms of the most like talented scientists in the world that created, you know, nuclear weapons. So that was clearly weaponizing our intelligence. But we also used it to create like nuclear power, for instance. So it's sort of this ultimate dual use technology. And the problem is that intelligence will unlock all sorts of other technologies. So it might unlock like new novel types of bioweapons, for instance, that was not possible to create with our sort of limited human minds. And this is something that a lot of world-renowned scientists and Nobel Prize winners are warning about, because once the cat is out of the bag, it starts this arms race that, you know, once you know, the US intelligence agencies sort of realized that, oh, you could actually build something as powerful as rabies that might only spread to particular ethnicities, for instance. And then, okay, that can be done, and we rather be first with building that thing than someone else building that thing. So that's like the danger with artificial intelligence, that, you know, you can have these misuse scenarios that become weaponized, and it creates like more and more sort of arms races. So I think I sort of answered your question, like how do Darwinian demons play a role? And then I think there's more facets to that, like for instance, where you know, you have arms races between different labs, with the CEOs saying that this is an existential risk. So they signed
that's
on
interesting.
the fact that this is an existential risk, but they're still continuing. But yeah, I think there's different directions we can take this conversation. So I'm curious if there is a particular direction you would want to take it.
Yeah, the lab thing I think is very fascinating. Like you're referencing some of these big AI labs, they sign documents that claim that this is extremely powerful and very dangerous, but still they continue. And by continuing, they're doing AI safety research internally, but they're also pushing the capabilities towards this danger that they believe that these models pose. So, and I think like there's one thing I wonder, and I asked another guest this as well. Anthropic is maybe the company that has been doing the most AI safety research, and but they also contribute to this AI race dynamics of building capabilities. Do you have an opinion on whether they are net good or net bad for AI development?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and depending on what I answer here, I might make some enemies. But I think Anthropic didn't start the arms race. So I think they're actually like net positive here. because there's a lot of talent that have left the other labs because they were not satisfied with them taking safety seriously enough. And I know that Dario is trying to push for what he calls like race to the top instead of a race to the bottom. So that means essentially like leading with safety and pushing the other labs to be more safe. So I actually think they are a net positive because they didn't start it. Or, I mean, arguably, Dario and others in Anthropic worked for OpenAI back in the days. And I think they probably shouldn't have released, ChatGPT in the first place and started this arms race. I think I sort of understand that they did it from good intentions because, okay, it's better that all of society knows about this technology so we can have public discourse. And once, the cat is out of the bag, it's possible to sort of talk about it and also have regulatory discourse around it. So in some ways, like my job was way, way easier now because of it. That's one of the reasons why I actually left the Future of Humanity Institute over a decade ago and went into the issue of climate change because it was impossible to get any regulatory traction on artificial intelligence because people saw it as sort of, non-existent. So I'm trying to steelman why they did what they did. But I think in hindsight, what they should have done is that they should have showed these powerful demos to regulators. And they should have done that in a very convincing way, like looking at, GPT-3 and then a few months later, now we have GPT-4. Like, look what this will done on unemployment and look what this can do in terms of aiding in the creation of bioweapons. Because the base models can actually lower the threshold quite significantly there. And obviously they don't release those models in the open. So all of you viewers, the models that you interact with have sort of this thin safety layer on top. And with thin, I mean like really thin, because it's very easy to sort of jailbreak. But yeah, so to sort of answer your question, if I was like Dario back when he worked for OpenAI, I would have been but I don't know the whole story. Maybe that's why he left in the first place, because he didn't see that as a wise move to sort of do what they did. But yeah.
Do you think the release of ChatGPT was really significant, like the counterfactual of them not releasing it? How do you think the world would be dramatically different, or would someone else just release it a couple months later and it would be the same?
I think they made a huge bet. I mean, they put all of the money in the bank behind like scaling laws being true. And nobody at that time were willing to make that bet. So I think they probably, like, things could have gone like 5 years slower, because there's like, I can't think of a single entity that were willing to do that bet, but they made that bet. So I think it would have happened inevitably because of Moore's law. So at some point, maybe 5 years later, it would be cheap enough for anyone to take that bet. But 5 years is still like a lot when it comes to AI governance, because now we're talking about now, and this is the crazy thing, like all of the CEOs of the big labs signed a statement that this is an existential risk comparable to nuclear war and pandemics. And they're all saying we might have it in 3 years. So we really like could need those extra five years now. And it's like a little bit crazy that people are not like upset about it. And I understand that they need to engage in this arms race, but holy crap, like it is unprecedented. Like I can't give another example of someone being like, oh, we're building this technology that might destroy us all, and we all sign up to that like publicly, and we're like, by the way, we will build it in 3 years. Like something is a little bit messed up there, and I think people need to pay attention, because it's like the Nobel Prize laureates and also the academics that invented this technology in the first place that are saying like, this is real, this threat is real, and we need to take it seriously.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a lot of people are saying AGI is coming, but no one is actually pricing in what that means. So even the labs that claim that they really believe it, if they really believed it, would they act this way? Also, like from the investor perspective in like startups and stuff, there's a lot of startups that wouldn't really be viable if AGI actually comes very soon. There was a tweet by Jack Clark, one of the one of the Anthropic co-founders, and he said basically that it will come very soon, like within 2 years. And there's no one. I attended YC demo day just today actually, and there's no one in that room that's pricing in if that is actually true. And but I mean, Anthropic is maybe even themselves not pricing in that. So
No,
why
I
would
think
why would they?
nobody is taking, like, they're intellectually saying that it might happen. And I mean, sort of, if you follow the curve, you know, it is happening. Like, I think 3 years is a likely scenario here, you know, but it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but regardless, like 10 years is like really, really short amount of time, you know. The rollout regulation always takes like more than 10 years. So 10 years is like sort of minimum. So we're still talking like really, really short timeline here. And I think nobody's pricing it in. There is no plan from anyone. Like, nobody has a plan for this. Like, it's gonna affect like the voters of any major political party. Like, a lot of people are gonna get unemployed, and also like we're heading into a World War III if we sort of continue this dynamic. So I wonder where is, like, I don't know, where is the Greta Thunberg here? Like, how dare you? Because there is like a sense of like you're using our data against our consent to train AI models that you're saying will replace us. And you're saying, by the way, it might also kill all of us. It is beyond insane when you think about it. So where is the people that are like, how dare you? And again, like, I think I know for a fact that, you know, the people that are running these labs are like well-intentioned, and they're like genuinely concerned about this. Because again, I started with saying, you know, we're not here to blame individuals, we're here to blame the system. And right now, the system is a system of arms race dynamics, because you can be ethical and say like, hey, let's sign the FLI statement that we're going to pause for 6 months. But the only thing that will happen is that the race will go on without you, and you are going to become irrelevant. So I understand that, you know, you can't pause. Like, pausing is naive. But this is where we need regulation. We need like natural regulation in the United States primarily. But I would say that we also need like global governance around this, because there's also the arms race between the US and China. And I mean, I understand US policymakers that are saying, you know, we can't let dictatorial regimes win this arms race, because then they will dictate the future of humanity. And I absolutely don't want that to happen. But at the same time, like, we haven't figured out the alignment problems. I mean, if we are racing ahead, and all of the best scientists are warning us that could lead to extinction, it doesn't matter who is racing ahead. So I think like the only way is sort of global governance and global treaties. And I think right now we're doing a great thing by saying dictatorial regimes should not get access to like the compute hardware that is needed to train all of these models. But at some point in time, those regimes will have their own semiconductor industry to do the same thing. So like there is no scenario where we can freeze this out from like dictatorial regimes forever. So the only way is a global treaty around this. Like I don't see any other way.
Yeah.
And sorry if
So
that was a bit of an emotional rant here, but
yeah, no, so many threads to pull from
Yeah.
that. But you are touching upon something that is very close to your heart at the moment, because this is very relevant to your new venture, Lucid Computing. Do you want to just tell basically what Lucid Computing is, and then I have 10 other threads to to pull from that rant.
So essentially, like, essentially what Lucid Computing, what we're doing is that we are making it possible to track, like what compute hardware. So in order to train like an AI model, you need a bunch of like NVIDIA AI chips, and we build software to help you track where are all of those chips being located and what are they being used for. Because right now, a lot of these computer chips are being smuggled in places where they shouldn't be. Like we had the DeepSeek announcement recently out of China, and it was like a scientific breakthrough, but also most intelligence sources are telling us that they used a bunch of NVIDIA H100s they shouldn't have had that access to in the first place. So we're essentially building software that once you install this piece of software in the so-called trusted execution environment of the chip, we can actually figure out like where is the chip located and is it being used to train an AI model that sort of violates the United States like AI diffusion framework, because they have this like export control framework where they don't want certain countries to get access to this technology. So we make like the whole deal of export controls a lot more automated, because ultimately we want AI technology to exist in the world. It should exist in a safe and responsible way, where it's not weaponized and where it's not used to create, rabies 2.0. So our technology is a way to sort of enable that, enable data center construction in everything from the UAE and Saudi Arabia and all sorts of places in Europe and the rest of the world, but that it's done in a way where we can sort of rest assured that we're not training super intelligence here, and we're not training anything beyond sort of the threshold of the export control in the United States government. And we know that the chips are not ending up in like any military hardware or application in a country where it's not supposed to be, essentially.
Right. To what extent can you differentiate between the use cases? Can you like detect if it's used for military things, or is it mainly if it's training or inference, or
No,
what is
so
the granularity?
we can't detect what it is being used for. So I mean, what we can detect is it used to sort of train a model above a certain compute threshold. So for instance, export controls are like 10 to the power of 26 flops. And the sort of idea here is that, if you have more compute because of this scaling loss that I talked about earlier, like if you throw more compute on the model, it will become smarter and more intelligent. And when it becomes more capable, you can also use it for all sorts of, weaponization. So it's essentially like you can detect if we're trying to train like something akin to super intelligence here, but we can also detect like who is doing the training, more or less. So if you pair our technology with something like a chip registry, you can essentially say that it's the chip is supposed to be located in this data center in, let's say, Sweden, for instance, but now it's in North Korea for some reason, and that should probably not be the case.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think it might be worth digging down into the export control a bit more. We used to have one law for this a couple months ago, but recently there was a new one. Do you want to explain maybe the evolution of export controls and what the current regulatory
So
framework
like
is?
the Biden administration, so sort of the last week of that administration, they released a framework called the Artificial Intelligence Diffusion Framework. And it essentially divides the world into different tiers. So you have sort of the close allies in tier 1. So that's like that those are countries like Sweden or the UK and France and so on. And so that's 18 countries in total. And then we have tier 3, which is countries that are adversarial to the United States. So examples there include Russia, China, North Korea, and so Iran and so on. So that's also, I think, 18 countries in total. And then tier 2 is everyone in between, where they're essentially saying that you can get access to advanced compute hardware needed to train artificial intelligence, but you can only get access under certain conditions. And those conditions might be that you verify who is the end user of the chip, and that they are using the thing for what you're supposed to use it for, and it's located where it's supposed to be located, essentially. So it's the framework sort of outlines who get access to the compute hardware, but it also outlines who get access to like the model weights themselves, because once you use all of this compute hardware to train like an AI model, you can then sell that model to someone, for instance, and it outlines who you're allowed to sell it to. Most notably, they make an exception for open source models. So essentially, like if you make all of your model weights completely open, you can essentially, anyone can get access to it, more or less. And the reason why they decided to do so is because they were sort of a bit worried that not doing so would actually be against the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. So there were like lawyers that were sort of warning them that going after open source could be a bad idea. But at the same time, we're seeing Chinese military and other states actually using open source models like Facebook's Llama model. So I think there needs to be a framework here that keeps sort of Western and US national security interests while sort of balancing the other aspects, because I think it's in the end very, very dangerous to have sort of this loophole, more or less. I mean, right now it's not a big deal because we haven't achieved super intelligence, but once we get closer and closer, like we don't want just anyone to have access to this technology, similar to how I don't think anyone should have access to nukes in the end of the day. Like having a nuclear umbrella is a very good thing, and if anyone had nukes and we handed it out like candy, the world would be like a way less safe place.
Yeah. Is it even possible, though, to prevent someone from using open source models? So if you have them open on the internet, couldn't the Chinese military download them no matter what the rules are?
Oh, Yeah, of course, if you
Yeah.
have them open on the internet. But I
Yeah.
think the point here is that maybe you shouldn't have them open on the internet in the first
Right.
place.
Right. Yeah.
So sort of
Yeah.
similar to how, you cannot give a step-by-step instructions for how to produce nukes and just publish that on a website. Like you have a bunch of intelligence agencies that will knock on your door the next day. But some of these models, the model weights encodes instructions for how to produce not nukes necessarily, but certainly like a lot of dangerous biological weapons, and that
Yeah.
has been proven by a lot of people like over and over again. So I think it's sort of a little bit absurd that you cannot do the other, but you can't
Yeah.
do the first thing, which is just publishing the model that gives the output on how to produce those horrible weapons, but you're not allowed to give the instructions yourself on how to output or train or create these dangerous weapons.
Yeah, the information is out there in the model weight, so it's almost like if it's illegal to give instructions in English, then it should be illegal to give instructions in some like made-up language that you
Exactly.
come up with. This made-up language is a bit complicated in this case because it's like model weights, matrix multiplications, blah blah. But it's still a
it's
decodable
still the
language.
same thing, right? It's
Yeah.
still the same thing, and I think in the end of the day, like freedom of speech is never absolute. I mean, we there are certain things, because it is limiting freedom of speech, that I'm not allowed to tell people how to do nuclear weapons step by step. But it's a common sense thing to not allow in society. So I think we need to be like have a good balance here.
Yep.
Overall. And I'm not saying that open source is necessarily bad. Like, I think open source can be like incredibly, incredibly good. And I applaud, for instance, Google DeepMind, that they made all of the protein folding in AlphaFold available to the rest of the world. So I think open source, anything related to like tools and good like drug discovery, etc., etc. But when it comes to things that we believe can be dangerous, like, we probably shouldn't open source it. So I think we just need to be a little bit like smart around those things and not be too ideological, where it's like everything open source is great, and then or like, oh, the other extreme, you shouldn't open source anything. I think open source as much as possible, but only when it stops making sense. Please don't do it.
I see. The counter argument to this, or I guess the counter argument to, or like the argument for releasing everything basically open source, I've heard some people have, is that powerful AI will be even more dangerous if it's like centralized. But if you have multiple AIs that are competing in some larger system, they cancel out each other in some way. I've not been able to make this argument make sense in my head, but does it speak to you?
Yeah, no, I know the argument. I know it well, and I understand where it's coming from. I mean, it's coming from a deep suspicion of like government and centralization of power, and it comes from a deep suspicion of like authoritarianism. Like, I think the absolute nightmare would be, authoritarian regimes getting access to AGI first and using as a tool against its people. Because I think we need to remember that even the most dictatorial regimes on the planet needs to at least minimally care about their citizens, because they've always needed those citizens for their productive capabilities. I mean, otherwise you're just like, the master of a wasteland if you don't have any citizens that at least have enough health to do useful things for you as a dictator. But with artificial intelligence, that link is completely severed. You don't need citizens, you don't need humans, you don't need any of that to project power anymore. So I understand where these people are coming from that are making that argument, But I don't think it's based on historical reality, because I think if you look throughout history and the war of empires and the evolution of empires, is there like a single sort of example of something that has been like complete equilibrium forever? I mean, what tends to happen like over time is that, one empire becomes powerful and then it sort of takes over all of the other empires, and then someone else gets powerful and takes over them, and then you sort of have this evolution of borders. I think there's zero examples of neither evolution or empires where everything just sort of becomes static because of a complete balance of power. Like a complete balance of power is just like a total science fiction, more or less. And you can actually, like, from a game theory perspective, that's why nuclear umbrellas are so useful, for instance, because when we only had like the Soviet and the United States and maybe a few other states, then mutually assured destruction, like the game theory actually worked, and it kept us safer. But once you start handing out nukes like candy, and you have like, I don't know, 10,000 agents with nuke, or like everyone would have their own nuke, it would actually make us a lot less safe, because the same game theory doesn't sort of apply anymore, because there will be someone that shoots their nukes out of mistake, and there will be someone who might be suicidal and they actually don't care about retaliation, they just genuinely want to end like the human race. So I think we need like a good balance here. Like we should be extremely cautious about one single person getting access to AI technology. But I think the solution is not to give everyone access. I think the solution here is to say, hey, the best thing is probably not to train this thing in the first place and make sure that nobody does it until we have figured out how it can be done in a provenly safe way. And
maybe the
that
counter
was a little bit of a long rant.
No, I love it. I love it. So much insight. So much insight. No, and the counter argument maybe to that is that nukes is not a defense against other nukes. I mean, maybe it's in some indirect psychological way, but if someone fires a nuke, you can't like fire your nuke on that nuke to cancel it out. Some people argue that AI can be defense against other AIs, and that's why everyone has to have their own AI. Is this something you think is feasible?
Well, I mean, in a world where it is as easy to defend as it is to attack, then that might be true. But like, hey, entropy is a thing, like if you take a room, there's like one way or just a few configurations in which the room will be clean, and like an infinite configurations in which it will be, messy and unclean, right? And that's the same principle here, right? I mean, you can attack and screw something up in an infinite amount of ways, but you can only sort of keep it in any very few innumerable like beneficial configurations. So that means that it's always easier to attack and harder to defend when it comes to this type of technology. I think, I mean, if I'm still waiting. If someone comes to me and say like, hey, here's the perfect AI defense, then I will be gladly saying like, please hand it out to everyone. We have figured out the perfect AI defense, and everyone has access to it now. Then please hand it out like handy. But so far, like all of this is very theoretical, and I think it's very much like built on political ideology. So instead of having like a pragmatic mindset of what actually works and reason about that in a scientific and logical way, it's a bit like ideological, where it's extremes, like, okay, everyone should have access because of my ideology says so, more or less. And I think that's a little bit what's probably going on with a lot of these people, unfortunately.
Yeah, we talked a lot about export controls here, which is one type of AI regulation, but there's also the limiting the amounts of flops one can do before you either have to report it or do a lot of evaluations or something like that. What is your opinion on those kind of regulations? Are they needed too?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's more or less the direction that the export controls is heading as well. Like overall compute budgeting, and if you look at the sort of definitions on the model weight, that is compute is involved. So 10 to the power of 26 flops is sort of the threshold, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that is like absolutely the right way to go, because like what worries me is the capabilities, not necessarily that we have now. They actually worry me a lot as well, because there is a lot that can be done sort of underneath all of the sort of thin safety measures that are being applied. But I mean, especially like the really dangerous stuff is what will happen in 3 years from now. And what we do know is that Stargate, the new OpenAI project, like it's $500 billion spent on like compute and a lot of data centers, because we know that the scaling laws are a thing, and if we have more compute directed on both on the inference side and the training side, it will yield better results overall. So I think it's a very probably the only tractable way to really govern this globally is to set some sort of limit of compute and who gets access to that compute in the end of the day.
Right. Am I understanding Lucid Computing correctly, that you can like help the tier 2 countries get access in a more like like they can get more compute if they can report what they are doing, and then like the selling point is that we allow you to buy more compute, basically?
Exactly. So I mean, you need to comply with a list of criteria in order to import like the GPUs to train the AI models in the first place, and we can automate that compliance reporting for you, essentially. So that is the value offer, that with very low compliance overhead, you get access to the compute hardware so that you can do like amazing things with it, things that will benefit humanity, and you can still like report back in an automated and very importantly privacy preserving way as well. You can report back to the authorities that this is being done in a safe way that doesn't compromise like your national security interests, and I think that's like really, really important.
Yeah. Is there maybe a fear that cheating will happen? Can you like guarantee that they don't uninstall the software on their chips?
Yeah, so we leverage like existing hardware primitives. So like all of the modern chips comes with something called a trusted execution environment, which has like is sort of this cryptographically and sealed like a virtual machine with a private key, and you can sort of trace that to a root of trust on the chip. So essentially, unless you sort of hack into the thing, you can trust that it is doing what it is supposed to be doing. And it has been theorized that maybe you could hack into those trusted execution environments through like side channel attacks, for instance. So that's something that we're taking quite seriously, and actually like testing ourselves and hiring hackers to do exactly that. And in the end of the day, like I think you need multiple layers of security. So I think there is no sort of one silver bullet here. I think over time, like using existing hardware primitives like we do, I think is the first good solution. But then we want to expand to sort of more types of hardware security. So it could be, for instance, putting your chips in sort of a tamper-proof box to avoid those types of side channel attacks, where you could, at least in theory, extract the private key. So I'm a big believer in sort of the Swiss cheese model of security, where you see like, any slice of cheese have holes in them, but if you add enough slices, it's very improbable that, one arrow will sort of fit perfectly through every single hole in every single cheese slice. So I think we need to start somewhere, and then we will like add more layers of security as we go on. And I think we also need to remember that these AI diffusion rules are only like a few weeks old, and I think there's a lot of work to do, but we're extremely committed to doing so very quickly, because I think like the national security of the Western world is at stake. But I think even more broadly than that, I think the security of all states and all of humanity are at stake to some extent, and we need some sort of hardware mechanisms to write like treaties in the future, where countries can agree that we're not gonna train model X, Y, and Z with those particular characteristics or over a certain size, and our technology would enable those types of treaties further down the line.
Yeah. In the book, you describe 3 like AI doom scenarios, and one of them is this international war with AI. But the one you worry most about, you say, is the AI evolution, or I guess, is it correct to say that this is the same as recursive self-improvement scenarios? You nod, so I assume that's a yes.
No, actually not.
Okay.
I would say like
interesting.
Yeah. So the scenarios that is sort of outlined, and there could of course be like a combination of all of them, and like many permutations of them happening at sort of once. But I think the first scenario that I outline is sort of more recursive self-improvement, where you essentially have like a AI singleton that becomes like vastly more intelligent than all human intelligence combined on planet Earth, more or less, and there will be very little that we can do to stop it. So that's the type of scenarios that people like, Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nick Bostrom and others are outlining. Then the second scenario is sort of more, the war dynamics, and I think we've talked a lot about that already. Like, if AI can enable new types of weapons in the realm of bio or chemistry or nanorobotics or whatever, there will be sort of this arms race to get to those weapons first, and the curve that I talked about earlier of like exponentially more and more harmful weapons will continue. Then the third scenario is like AI evolution. So this is more sort of a scenario where over time we will just be gradually replaced, because even if like AGI is like a couple of years away, there's always friction in terms of society's capacity to implement a certain technology. But I could sort of imagine over time that it will be adaptive for enterprises to have as few employees as possible. And you already see a lot of enterprises bragging about like how many people they could essentially fire and let go of, and now they're way more efficient, and investors love that stuff. So it will be adaptive for them to fire as many people as possible. But I think at some point these AI systems will be so good at giving advice. So like as a CEO, for instance, you will have your robo advisor that tells you exactly what to do given certain situations, and you might even have like the first. So my prediction is that within the next 3 to 5 years we will have the first CEO that is like fired because he or she or them doesn't follow the advice of their AI advisor, and the board will be like, hey, we're here to make a profit, and you're just being stupid and silly for not following this advice because it has been sort of profit maximizing so far. And I think that will be applicable to other domains outside of corporate profit maximizing. So whenever you're running a campaign as a politician, you will have sort of the marketing advisor that will give you talking points and maybe ways of attacking your opponents, or ways of flooding the zone with misinformation in order to get like an advantage. Or like militarily speaking, if you're in a war, you will sort of listen to AI systems more and more. So the point here is that over time, whatever entity that listens more to the AI systems and replaces human judgment for AI judgment will be better at surviving. They will be better at the game of survival. If it's the survival in a corporate realm, or in the military realm, or in a political realm, it really doesn't matter. And then I think at some point in time it will just be humans will just be irrelevant. So the sort of type of scenario that I am worried about is where so we have sort of this technological landscape being developed around us, and we don't fully understand how it works. It hasn't been built by us. It's built by these like bigger enterprises and governments, but there's no human in the loop at all, and it's just being built around us. And if we don't build sort of the appropriate safety nets, it's sort of like we're like a rat in a big city. We will be able to survive. There will be enough wealth for to be sort of trickled down to us in order to survive, but we will be just like the rats. Like, it will be an alien landscape to us, and we will have zero control over our own destiny, and it will be completely up to these like higher forms of intelligence to decide what to do with us. And maybe at some point it will be like cheap enough to just get rid of all of the rats, where it's like, okay, this has been like too annoying for too long, so we might not need them around. And I think fundamentally this vision is sort of very aligned with how current incentive structures already operate, more or less. So I mean, as I said earlier, like, companies are there to profit maximize, and it will be adaptive for them to probably to replace as many humans as possible. And similarly, there is a global competition between countries. So you might have the similar thing as tax havens, where it's like, oh, look at these big countries with their criteria that there needs to be humans in the loop. That is super inefficient. Move all of your productive capabilities to us, because here you're actually allowed to automate everything without a single human in the loop, and no human ethical concerns, because who cares about that? And those countries will see way higher economic growth, and that economic growth will translate into military capabilities and so on. But ultimately there will be no humans in those countries. They will all be sort of AI agents. So it's almost like the current legal structures will be like weaponized against us, more or less. So that's sort of the third scenario that I sort of see as the most likely one, more or less.
Okay. Yeah, and in that third scenario, there's no nations, really. There's like, the US could be the ones that develop the technology that leads to this. Does Lucid Computing have any, so to speak, aspiration of also solving this problem, or is it mainly problem number two to not have risk dynamics between?
I think governance of compute can solve all of those things, right? Because fundamentally, in order for a AI system to be general enough to replace humans in all domains, so like the concept of AGI, but also the concept of artificial and superintelligence, it all requires compute. I mean, we still need data centers these artificial brains that are running the algorithms, and if we can have like mechanisms to keep that under control, we can essentially like eliminate any of these three scenarios in the end of the day.
So you previously founded a company, Normative, which you were CEO for how long? A couple years?
For 10 years.
Yeah, more than a couple. 10 years.
I co-founded it 10 years ago. Almost 11 years now.
Yeah. How is your role as CEO of Lucid Computing compared to the role of CEO of Normative? What were the learnings from those 10 years, and what carries over to this new company?
I mean, what a great question. I learned so much from Normative, and I think like I have zero regrets doing all of that, because I mean, climate change, I still think it's like one of the most important problems in the world. And there is sort of this dynamic between climate change and power struggles as well, because as I sort of point out in my book, that a lot of climate change is fundamentally about, smart resource management without externalities. And if we can't do that well, then the zero-sum dynamics will only be bigger, right? So, I mean, there is this like piece of data for every standard deviation of increase in global temperatures, like the probability of interstate conflict and war goes up with like 15%. Because like, again, if we can't manage resources like water, and if the earth is getting hotter, then there will be sort of more conflicts around it. But that's not your original question. It was like about what I've learned. And I think I've learned a lot. I've learned how policy works, how standards work, and policy and standards, I think, is incredibly important for the governance of artificial intelligence, but also how to, build a team. I mean, being a first-time founder, I have no clue what I'm doing, right? But luckily enough, I think I was intelligent enough to know that I had no clue. So I hired people that were, more skillful in all of the domains where I fell short, and I could sort of, learn from them. So I think there is a lot to learn. But I also think that, the next generation of like sort of software as a service companies will like look very, very different. So I think there's a lot of things that can be automated in the end of the day. And I mean, we have like used AI for forever, more or less, at Normative to automate carbon emissions reporting, and similarly we're using AI in Lucid Computing to keep track of where are all of the GPUs and to sort of enable governance of this technology globally. So I see a lot of similarities, but hopefully I will be able to make less mistakes and sort of learn from my mistakes from the previous journey. And those mistakes have covered everything from, hiring to performance management frameworks to like how to structure a team to like, I mean, the list is too long to just give it in sort of one sentence.
You said one of the things you learned was policy. What does being good at policy mean?
So I think that means a couple of things. There is always sort of a public zeitgeist around like what is possible. So I mean, they're like it's sometimes like referred to as policy windows, that we have a certain momentum where it is actually possible for a politician to say like, I think this thing is really important. It's really important to manage carbon emissions, or it's really important to manage compute, for instance. And it's to realize like, when do those moments arise? and to be prepared when those moments rise. So you actually sit there with a plan of how to do it, and with a standard, and ideally a standard that has also been adopted by industry. So I mean, take for instance carbon emissions accounting. The greenhouse gas protocol standard was created like 25 years ago, and the reason why it was later sort of implemented into law is because it had been well tested within industry, and once there was enough momentum because of for instance COP in Paris, then you could sort of say like, okay, hey, let's do this thing. We have a standard, we have a formula, and now there's a policy window to implement it. So to me, that is about like building the relationships, and it's about like having a standard and having a plan, and know when do you sort of hand that over to the decision makers when the policy window arises. And I think there will be a lot of future policy windows in artificial intelligence. It can be anything from when we see the first sort of mass layoffs and protests, or when we see sort of the first, I think like, Cuban Missile Crisis equivalent between China and the US. So there will be these like very important moments, and we need to know what to do when those moments arise.
Okay. I know, switching topics a little bit here, or a lot.
Yeah.
What have you? I know you also meditate. What have you learned from gotten from meditation?
That's such a good question. Like, I mean, maybe you can sort of.
I'm going to make a montage
a little
of
bit
you
from
saying
my way of moving that I have. Like, I sort of might not strike you as someone who does a lot of meditation, but I think that's especially why meditation is important for me, because I think I have a neurosystem that is like going on full force like all the time, which I think it can sort of do both for good and for bad. If I'm misdirected in terms of like doing the wrong things, it can be quite bad and painful. So to me, like being able to sort of meditate and that, to me, that means that I just am sort of more in tune with my body as I'm making decisions, and give me time to reflect a little bit more, instead of just like directing all of my sort of pent up energy in a specific direction. So I think like meditation has been like very important in that regard. And I think like one of my most transformative experiences was a Vipassana retreat that I did recently in Costa Rica with a bunch of friends, and since then I'm like meditating every morning. And to me it also, to me it means essentially aligning sort of my values with my emotions as well, because like my values is fundamentally I want to create as much flourishing for all sentient beings, like maximize happiness for sentient beings. But I need to sort of be able to feel those emotions within me, and I think meditation and like loving kindness meditation like helps a lot with that. So I guess to summarize, it helps me sort of go in the right direction, but as I'm going in that direction, I can go in that direction from a place where I'm like aligned with my values, and the rest of my body is aligned with my values. Because I think something like procrastination, for instance, is probably like different parts in yourself that want sort of different things. So there's a little bit of an inner fight, like one part of you might just want to go and watch like TikTok or YouTube videos or whatever it is, right? And then another part like thinks that, okay, you need to be more strategic here, like think about the inbox and all the important emails, and you have sort of this inner fight, right? And I think meditation is a way for those parts of yourself to be more at peace with themselves. So it's another type of alignment, but I think it's like very similar to sort of, Darwinian demons and regulations and all the other things that we have talked about, but it's within you instead, and within your spiritual being, if you will.
Right. So let's say it's the year 2035 and you have just meditated, and we're living in like the AI utopia. There was no problem with misalignment, no evolutionary. They live to serve us. We don't have to work. Everything is perfect. And you reflect back what you did at this point, and what is the thing that you would be most proud of?
Yeah. I think the thing I would be most proud of is, if I manage to play like at least a small role in building the mechanism design that enables like global cooperation. Because I think the current sort of Darwinian paradigm, where it's the law of the jungle and we all survive through bigger guns and bigger weapons, it can only end in doom and destruction. So I think if I can sort of contribute, then I call that sort of the great bootstrap in my book, where we descend we ascend from those like basic Darwinian drives and build sort of a more compassionate world. But we can only do that through the right sort of mechanisms, and I think if lucid computing can contribute to that in a little bit, in some way, and I think also normative, we have done like amazing things in the realm of climate, to just show that you can build these mechanisms for cooperative behavior. And if I inspired some other people that made that possible, or made that possible like in some regard, I would feel like really, really good about myself.
You have inspired me. I'm actually, I have the book here. I was going to ask you when we met yesterday to sign it, but I forgot it. So next time.
We'll meet many times. Like we're in separate rooms right now, but we're two Swedes in San Francisco. I will sign it next time.
Amazing. That's a great way of ending it. I hope you get to live that and be proud of that, and I hope we don't get the misalignment problems, and we can live in the utopia in 10 years. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Lucas. And you're working on the same things, but a different side of the coin with evals. So very, very grateful for your contributions, and thanks a lot for having me.